I was sitting on a bus with my daughter, watching her stare out the window like she was saying goodbye, when a stranger leaned toward me and whispered, "You need to get off at the next stop." My heart stopped. 5 minutes later, everything I believed about family, love, and trust shattered forever. In that moment, I had to choose between believing the child I raised and listening to a warning that could save my life. I never imagined that stepping off that bus would reveal a betrayal so deep it would change me forever. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 71 years old when my life quietly began to unravel without my knowledge. I had lived in Portland, Oregon, for most of my adult life, in a modest 2-story house that my husband and I had bought when we were young and hopeful. For nearly 40 years, that house had been filled with ordinary sounds: morning coffee brewing, evening news murmuring in the background, laughter on holidays, and quiet conversations before sleep. Then, 6 years ago, my husband passed away from a sudden stroke, and the house became unbearably silent. After his death, I went through a long season of loneliness that I never spoke about to anyone. I learned how to cook for one person, how to fall asleep without hearing another heartbeat beside me, and how to pretend that I was doing fine when people asked. I told myself that grief was something you were supposed to handle quietly, especially at my age. So I did. 2 years later, I sold the house. It was not because I wanted to leave, but because staying felt like living inside a museum of memories. Every room reminded me of what I had lost. With the money, I bought a small wooden cabin near Mount Hood, surrounded by tall pine trees and clean mountain air. That place became my refuge. It was where I learned how to breathe again. I kept the rest of the money in savings and maintained a life insurance policy that my husband and I had arranged long ago. I was careful with every dollar. I did not travel much. I did not buy expensive things. I believed in living simply and responsibly, especially in my later years. Financial independence meant safety to me. My daily routine was quiet and predictable. In the mornings, I watered my plants and made myself oatmeal. I spent hours reading novels and devotional books. Every Sunday, I attended church and sat in the same pew. I knew the names of my neighbors' dogs, but not much else. It was a small life, but it felt peaceful. My daughter, Melissa, lived 3 states away. We spoke mostly on birthdays and holidays. Sometimes she would call late at night, tired and distracted, promising to visit soon. I never complained. I told myself that she was busy building her own life, and that was what I had always wanted for her. Still, there were nights when I missed her so badly that my chest ached. I kept her childhood photos in a box beside my bed. On difficult evenings, I would take them out and remember the little girl who once believed I could fix anything. I often wondered if I had failed her in some invisible way. Maybe I had worked too much. Maybe I had been too strict. Maybe I had not listened enough. Those thoughts followed me into my dreams. Sometimes, I would sit in the living room and talk softly to my husband's photograph, telling him about my day. It was my private way of surviving the quiet. Back then, I believed that family bonds were unbreakable. I believed that love, once built, could never turn dangerous. I trusted my daughter completely. Looking back now, I realized that my peaceful life was standing on fragile ground. I just did not know it yet. And if I had known what was coming, I might have held on to those ordinary days a little more tightly. If you're still watching and starting to feel connected to this story, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me, because what happens next will reveal the first warning sign I almost ignored. The first call from Melissa came on a quiet Tuesday evening in early autumn. I had just finished washing the dinner dishes when my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. Her name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I simply stared at it, surprised. We had not spoken in nearly 3 months. When I answered, her voice sounded thin and tired, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight for too long. She told me that her marriage had ended badly, that she had lost her job at a real estate firm, and that she did not know where else to go. I could hear exhaustion in every word. Without hesitation, I told her to come home. She arrived 2 days later with 2 suitcases and dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, as if life had slowly been shrinking her. When I hugged her at the door, she began to cry, clinging to me like she used to when she was a child. In that moment, I felt needed again, and I welcomed that feeling without question. For the first few days, I was simply grateful to have her near. We cooked together, watched old movies, and talked about harmless things. I told myself that this was what healing looked like: a mother and daughter finding their way back to each other. Then the questions began. At first, they seemed harmless. She asked where I kept important documents. She wanted to know whether I had updated my will. She wondered aloud if my life insurance policy was still active. She asked how much I kept in savings. Each question arrived softly, wrapped in concern, and I answered them without thinking. Soon, her behavior shifted in small but noticeable ways. She began waking up before me, preparing breakfast, organizing my medication, reminding me of doctor appointments I had not scheduled. She insisted on driving me to church. She checked my calendar daily. She asked how I was feeling multiple times a day. People might have called it devotion. To me, it felt strange. Sometimes, I noticed her watching me from across the room when she thought I was not paying attention. Her eyes would linger on my hands, my face, my posture, as if she were studying me. When I looked back, she would quickly look away and smile. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. Late at night, I sometimes heard her whispering on the phone in the guest room. When I passed by, her voice would drop even lower. Once, I thought I heard her mention backup plans, but when I asked her about it the next morning, she laughed and said I must have been dreaming. I wanted to believe her. I told myself she was depressed, that she was anxious, that she needed stability. I reminded myself that questioning her would only push her away, and I was terrified of losing her again. One evening, while we were drinking tea on the porch, she asked me what would happen if I suddenly passed away. I laughed awkwardly and told her not to talk like that, but inside, something tightened in my chest. A week later, she suggested that we take a short trip to my cabin near Mount Hood. She had already researched the bus schedule, packed supplies, and chosen dates. She said fresh air would help both of us. I agreed. As I watched her finalize the plans with careful precision, I felt a quiet unease settle over me. I did not understand it. I did not question it. I simply ignored it. And that decision would nearly cost me my life. If you're still watching and noticing how things are slowly changing, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're paying attention, because the next chapter shows how close I came to missing the truth. The morning of our departure arrived before I felt ready for it. It was still dark outside when I heard soft footsteps moving quickly through the hallway. A few seconds later, Melissa knocked on my bedroom door and told me it was time to get up. Her voice sounded urgent, sharper than usual, as if being late was not an option. I glanced at the clock. It was barely 5 in the morning. Normally, I like to take my time in the mornings. I enjoyed sitting with my coffee, watching the sky slowly brighten. That day, there was no space for any of that. Melissa was already dressed, her hair pulled back tightly, her jacket zipped to her chin. She moved through the house like someone following a strict schedule, checking her phone, pacing between rooms, and rearranging items that were already in place. While I packed my small overnight bag, I noticed her standing near the front door, holding her black backpack against her chest. She did not set it down, not even for a moment. When I reached for it out of habit, thinking I might help her carry it, she pulled it away quickly, her expression flashing with irritation before she forced a smile. Throughout the morning, her phone never left her hand. It buzzed constantly. She read messages, typed short replies, then erased them. Several times, I saw her delete entire conversations. When I asked if everything was all right, she told me she was just dealing with paperwork from her old job. I wanted to believe her. The night before, I had woken up briefly and heard her whispering in the guest room. The door had been slightly open. I could not hear every word, but I caught fragments that stayed with me. She had mentioned Plan B and something about not messing this up. Her voice had sounded tense, almost desperate. When I asked her about it the next morning, she brushed it off, saying she had been talking about job applications. Even as she spoke, I could see her fingers trembling. As we locked the door and walked to the car, a familiar heaviness settled in my chest. I felt as though I were stepping into something I did not fully understand. Melissa drove faster than usual, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She did not turn on the radio. The silence between us felt thick and uncomfortable. We arrived at the bus station much earlier than necessary. The parking lot was half empty, and cold morning air wrapped around us as we stepped outside. A few travelers stood nearby, clutching coffee cups and suitcases. Everything looked ordinary, yet nothing felt right. Inside the station, Melissa chose seats near the wall and sat rigidly, her backpack resting on her lap. She checked her watch repeatedly. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the departure board, then back at her phone. I watched her from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what was happening to my daughter. Her breathing was shallow. Her shoulders were tense. When I gently placed my hand on her arm, she flinched, then apologized quickly. We lined up to board earlier than most passengers. She insisted on standing close to the gate, as if someone might take our place. When the driver finally called our route, she stood immediately and walked forward without looking back. As I followed her onto the bus, I felt a strange sense of finality, like a door closing behind me. I did not know why I felt that way. I only knew that something about this trip was wrong, and I was about to find out how wrong it truly was. If you're still watching and feeling that something is seriously wrong, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're still here. Because what happened on that bus changed everything. Inside the bus, the air smelled faintly of worn leather seats and engine oil. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting long, pale stripes across the aisle. The low hum of the motor blended with the soft murmurs of passengers settling into their seats. Everything about the scene felt ordinary, yet my heart refused to calm down. Melissa had chosen a seat near the back, close to the window. She placed her backpack firmly on her lap and turned her body slightly away from the aisle. I hesitated for a moment, then took a seat several rows ahead. I told myself she probably wanted some space. Still, the distance between us felt larger than the few feet of carpeted floor that separated our seats. As the bus began to move, I glanced back at her. She was staring out the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her backpack, as if she were afraid it might disappear. She did not look at me. She did not look at anyone. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. A few minutes into the ride, I turned in my seat and smiled at her, hoping to catch her attention. When our eyes met briefly, I said that it would be nice to spend some quiet time together at the cabin, just like we used to when she was young. She nodded once, her lips pressed together, and then looked away again. Her response felt like a closed door. I remembered mornings years ago when she would climb into my bed and talk endlessly about her dreams and worries. Back then, I had been her safest place. Now, I felt like a stranger trying to reach her from the outside. I leaned back and stared out my own window, watching trees and buildings blur in soft streaks of green and gray. My thoughts drifted to the choices I had made as a mother. The long hours I had worked, the times I had said no when she wanted something I could not give, the boundaries I had set because I believed they were necessary. Had those boundaries built resentment instead of strength? After a while, I gathered my courage and walked back to her seat. I sat beside her for a moment, careful not to crowd her. I told her that I was sorry if I had ever made her feel unsupported. I said I was proud of her for surviving everything she had been through. I reminded her that I loved her more than anything. She listened without interrupting, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. When I finished, she murmured that she knew I cared. Her voice was flat, almost distant. There was no warmth in it, no relief. It felt rehearsed. I returned to my seat feeling heavier than before. The silence between us grew thicker as the miles passed. The bus climbed steadily toward the mountains, its engine working harder with each incline. The road narrowed, the curves became sharper, the air inside the bus grew warmer, and several passengers opened their windows slightly. I noticed then that an older man a few seats across from me had been watching Melissa for some time. His gaze was not rude or curious. It was focused, alert, as if he were studying something important. Every time she checked her phone or adjusted her backpack, his eyes followed her movements. When he noticed me looking at him, he quickly looked away. A strange chill ran through me. I did not know his name yet. I did not know his story. I only knew that, for the first time since boarding the bus, someone else seemed to share my unease. And somehow, that made me even more afraid. If you're still watching and wondering who I could really trust, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're staying with me. Because in the next chapter, a stranger speaks up and saves my life. I noticed the man long before he ever spoke to me. He sat 3 seats across the aisle, slightly hunched forward, his hands resting on his knees. His gray jacket looked worn, and his hair was neatly combed, though streaked heavily with white. At first, I assumed he was simply another quiet passenger lost in his thoughts. But as the bus climbed higher into the mountains, I began to realize that his attention was not wandering. It was fixed. It was fixed on my daughter. Every time Melissa shifted in her seat, adjusted her backpack, or checked her phone, his eyes followed her movements. He did not stare rudely. He watched with careful concentration, as if he were piecing together a puzzle only he could see. The longer I observed him, the more uneasy I became. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. After everything that had happened in recent weeks, my nerves were raw. Perhaps I was projecting my own fear onto a stranger. Still, I could not ignore the way he occasionally leaned forward, inhaling slowly, as if testing the air around him. There was, indeed, a faint chemical scent inside the bus. It was subtle, barely noticeable beneath the usual mixture of fuel and upholstery. But once I became aware of it, I could not unnotice it. It reminded me vaguely of cleaning solvents, sharp and unfamiliar. A few minutes later, the man stood and walked slowly down the aisle. He stopped beside my seat. He introduced himself quietly as Harold. He told me he had worked for many years as a transportation safety inspector before retiring. He said he had spent his life investigating crashes caused by mechanical failure and human negligence. There was nothing dramatic in his voice, no hint of exaggeration. He spoke with the calm precision of someone used to dealing with facts. He asked if Melissa was my daughter. I nodded, suddenly unsure why my throat felt tight. Harold lowered himself into the empty seat beside me. He kept his voice low, careful not to attract attention. He explained that several things about the bus concerned him. The faint solvent smell. A slight delay in brake response he had noticed earlier. The way my daughter held her backpack as if it contained something she could not risk losing. The way she kept checking her watch, as though she were counting down. Each detail struck me like a small blow. He said he did not want to alarm me unnecessarily, but in his experience, the patterns like this often preceded serious incidents. He believed the braking system might have been tampered with. For a moment, I could not breathe. My first instinct was to reject everything he was saying. It sounded impossible, absurd. No one would sabotage a bus filled with innocent people. No daughter would endanger her own mother. I told myself that grief and loneliness had made me gullible. Harold leaned closer and said we should consider getting off at the next stop. He said waiting longer could be dangerous. He did not raise his voice. He did not beg. He simply stated it as a fact. I looked back at Melissa. She had noticed us talking. Her posture had stiffened. Her face had gone pale. Her fingers tightened around her backpack straps. When our eyes met, she looked away immediately. A few seconds later, she stood and walked toward us. Her steps were unsteady. She asked what we were discussing. Her smile did not reach her eyes. She whispered that things were complicated, that someone had pressured her, that she had made mistakes, that she never meant for anyone to get hurt. Her words tumbled out in fragments, unfinished and confused. Before I could ask for clarity, she stopped speaking and returned to her seat, trembling. Harold turned to me again. His expression was grave. He said we did not have much time. And suddenly, I understood that my life was standing at the edge of something irreversible. After Harold finished speaking, the air inside the bus seemed to grow heavier. It felt as if every breath required more effort than before. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear the hum of the engine beneath us. I sat frozen in my seat, staring at the floor, trying to process what he had just told me. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to tell myself that this was ridiculous, that I was letting fear control my thoughts. But another part of me, the quiet voice I had ignored for weeks, whispered that something was terribly wrong. Harold leaned closer and spoke again, his tone firm but calm. He explained that the next stretch of road was one of the steepest descents in the area. If the brakes failed there, the driver would have very little chance to stop. We had minutes, not hours. Minutes. I turned to look at Melissa. She was standing in the aisle now, gripping the top of a seat for support. Her face was pale, almost gray. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks on her skin. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had walked into my home weeks earlier. She looked like a frightened child who had lost control of everything. She begged me not to leave. Her voice shook as she spoke. She said she was scared. She said things had gone too far. She said she never wanted anyone to get hurt. Her words tumbled over each other, disorganized and desperate. I felt my chest tighten painfully. In that moment, every memory of her childhood rushed back to me. The nights I had stayed awake beside her bed when she had a fever, the afternoons I had helped her with homework, the way she used to hold my hand when crossing the street. How could I walk away from her now? Yet, even as she pleaded, something in her expression unsettled me. Beneath the fear, I saw confusion. Beneath the tears, I saw calculation. She was terrified, yes, but she was also trapped by something she had helped create. Her story did not fit together. One moment she blamed someone else. The next, she took responsibility. Then she pulled back again. It was like watching someone drown and refuse the life raft at the same time. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. I asked for strength, for clarity, for forgiveness if I was about to make the wrong choice. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. I stood up. My legs felt weak as I stepped into the aisle. Several passengers turned to look at me, their faces curious and confused. Harold rose beside me, ready to guide me toward the front. Melissa reached for my arm, her fingers trembling. I gently pulled away. I did not trust my voice to speak. Each step toward the door felt like walking through deep water. My heart screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to hold my daughter and pretend none of this was real. But my instincts pushed me forward. The driver slowed at the next turnout, puzzled by our sudden request. The bus pulled to the side of the road. The doors opened with a hiss. Cold mountain air rushed in. I stepped down onto the gravel shoulder, my knees shaking violently. Harold followed close behind. For a brief second, I turned back. Melissa stood at the doorway, sobbing openly now. Our eyes met. There was desperation in hers and heartbreak in mine. Then the doors closed. The bus began to move again, disappearing slowly around the curve. I stood there, alone on the roadside, wrapped in fear and doubt, wondering if I had just saved my life or shattered my heart forever. If you're still watching and your heart is racing right now, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're still with me, because in the next chapter, the truth crashes into reality. The moment the bus disappeared around the curve, silence rushed in to take its place. The sound of the engine faded quickly, swallowed by the vastness of the mountains. I stood on the narrow gravel shoulder, staring at the empty road, my arms wrapped tightly around myself. My entire body trembled, though I could not tell whether it was from the cold or from fear. Doubt crept into my thoughts almost immediately. What if I had been wrong? What if I had believed a stranger over my own daughter for nothing? What if I had just abandoned her when she needed me most? My knees weakened, and I lowered myself onto a nearby rock, pressing my hands against my face. My heart felt as if it were tearing itself apart inside my chest. Every instinct as a mother told me to run after that bus, to beg the driver to stop, to take back my decision. But it was gone. The mountain air was sharp and unforgiving. Wind moved through the pine trees, creating a low, whispering sound that only deepened my sense of isolation. There were no buildings, no other vehicles, no signs of life, just endless road, towering cliffs, and a sky that seemed far too large. Harold stood a few feet away, scanning the highway with tense focus. He checked his watch repeatedly. His calm from earlier had hardened into something urgent and alert. Minutes passed like hours. I watched the empty road, imagining every possible disaster. I pictured brakes screaming, tires skidding, metal tearing apart. Each image made my stomach twist violently. Then I heard it. At first, it was distant, almost unrecognizable. A sharp metallic shriek carried faintly through the trees. It was followed by a low, grinding roar that echoed against the mountainside. A moment later, faint screams pierced the air. My blood turned to ice. I stood up so quickly that I nearly fell. My hands flew to my mouth as a sob escaped my throat. I knew, without needing confirmation, that the bus had crashed. I whispered my daughter's name over and over, my voice barely audible. Harold had already pulled out his phone. His hands were steady as he spoke to emergency services, describing our location and what he believed had happened. He relayed every detail with precision, as though his control might somehow hold the situation together. When he finished the call, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder, grounding me. I felt hollow, like my body was still standing there while my spirit had shattered somewhere on that mountain road. We waited, listening to distant sirens grow gradually louder. After several minutes, a pickup truck appeared, climbing slowly toward us. Harold waved it down. The driver, a middle-aged man with concern etched across his face, agreed immediately to help when he heard about the crash. We climbed into his truck, and he drove us uphill as quickly as the narrow road allowed. When we reached the scene, chaos greeted us. The bus lay tilted against the rocky slope, its front end crushed, its windows shattered. Passengers were climbing out through emergency exits. Some were bleeding, some were crying. Some simply stared into space, stunned. Rescue vehicles were already arriving, lights flashing against the trees. My eyes searched desperately through the crowd. Then I saw her. Melissa stood near the edge of the road, her jacket torn, her hair tangled, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was alive. Relief and horror crashed into me at the same time. When our eyes met, she froze. She stared at me as if she were seeing a ghost. And in that moment, I knew she understood that everything had changed forever. The crash site quickly transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Police vehicles blocked both ends of the narrow highway. Paramedics moved swiftly among the passengers, kneeling beside the injured, wrapping bandages, checking pulses, and speaking in calm, steady voices. Firefighters inspected the damaged bus, shining powerful lights beneath the chassis and around the twisted metal. I stood near the edge of the road, wrapped in a blanket someone had placed over my shoulders. My hands were numb. My thoughts felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Everything around me appeared blurred, unreal, like a scene from a movie I had never agreed to watch. An officer approached and asked me to describe what had happened before I got off the bus. I told him about Harold's warning, about the strange behavior I had noticed in Melissa, about the backpack she never let go of. My voice sounded flat and unfamiliar to my own ears. Not far away, another officer was speaking to Harold, taking notes as he explained his observations about the braking system and the chemical smell. His professionalism impressed me. Even in shock, he remained focused on helping others understand the danger. A few minutes later, 2 officers approached Melissa. She was sitting on the ground, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her body shook with quiet sobs. When they asked her to stand, she hesitated, then slowly obeyed. One of the officers carefully took her backpack and placed it on the hood of a patrol car. Wearing gloves, he unzipped it and began removing its contents. I could not look away. First came a small plastic bottle, partially filled with clear liquid, then a pair of stained work gloves, then a folded cloth, darkened with grease. Finally, several papers slipped out, covered in handwritten notes and phone numbers. The officer's expression changed immediately. They called over a supervisor. More notes were taken. Photographs were snapped. The items were sealed in evidence bags. Someone mentioned the name Daniel Brooks. I recognized it instantly. Daniel was Melissa's boyfriend, a financial consultant she had spoken about in glowing terms months earlier. The man who had promised to help her fix everything. The man I had never trusted. The officers soon discovered dozens of messages between Melissa and Daniel on her phone. Messages discussing money, insurance policies, and making it look like an accident. They also found bank transfers and contracts linked to accounts in his name. Later, A detective informed me that someone had recently attempted to purchase an additional life insurance policy on me using forged documents. My signature had been copied. My identity had been stolen. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. I felt anger rise inside me, sharp and unfamiliar. Anger at Daniel for manipulating my daughter. Anger at Melissa for allowing herself to be used. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner. When I finally looked at her again, she was standing beside a patrol car, her wrists secured in handcuffs. An officer gently guided her toward the back seat. Our eyes met for a brief second. There was no defiance in her gaze. Only emptiness. Only regret. Only fear. I wanted to reach for her. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted answers that could never be enough. Instead, I stood still. As the police car drove away, something inside me shifted. I realized that the life I had known was over. There was no returning to quiet mornings and simple routines, no pretending that love alone could repair what had been broken. When Harold offered to drive me back to town, I accepted. As we left the mountains behind, I stared out the window, uncertain of what waited for me next, knowing only that I would never be the same again. If you're still watching and want to know how this story truly ends, please comment number 8 below to let me know you're here, because the final chapters reveal the cost of betrayal and the power of starting over. The months that followed the crash passed in a blur of courtrooms, paperwork, and sleepless nights. I attended every hearing, sitting quietly in the back row while lawyers discussed my daughter's actions in cold, technical language. They spoke of evidence, intent, financial motives, and conspiracy. Each word felt like another small cut to my heart. Melissa eventually pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. Daniel Brooks, the man who had orchestrated everything, received a life sentence after investigators connected him to several similar schemes in other states. Hearing the verdicts did not bring me relief. It only confirmed that my family had been shattered beyond repair. After the trials ended, I returned to my cabin near Mount Hood one final time. The forest was as beautiful as ever. Sunlight filtered through the pine branches, and birds sang as if nothing terrible had ever happened. But to me, the place felt haunted. Every corner reminded me of fear, betrayal, and loss. I realized I could not stay. I hired a real estate agent and put the cabin up for sale. When it sold a few weeks later, I felt strangely numb. Packing my belongings was harder. Each box held memories of the woman I had been before everything fell apart. When the last box was loaded onto the truck, I stood in the empty living room and whispered goodbye to a life I would never return to. Leaving Oregon was another act of courage. I said farewell to the few neighbors who had quietly supported me. I thanked Harold, who had stayed in touch and checked on me regularly. Without his warning, I would not be alive. We hugged briefly at the airport, both of us understanding that some connections are forged in crisis and last forever. I chose San Diego because of the ocean. I wanted to live somewhere that reminded me every day that the world was larger than my pain. My new apartment was small but bright, with a balcony overlooking the water. The sound of waves became my nightly companion. At first, I felt like a stranger in my own life. I did not know anyone. I did not have routines. I wandered through grocery stores and parks like a ghost, unsure where I belonged. Slowly, things changed. I joined a community group for older women. I volunteered at a local library. I began walking along the beach every morning, watching the sun rise over the horizon. I started writing in a journal, pouring my thoughts onto paper when they felt too heavy to carry alone. Occasionally, letters from Melissa arrived. I stacked them in a drawer without opening them. I was not ready. Some wounds need time before they can even begin to heal. One evening, As I sat on my balcony watching the sky turn orange and pink, I realized that I had laughed earlier that day. The sound had surprised me. It was the first sign that I was learning how to live again. 2 years have passed since the morning I stepped off that bus and unknowingly stepped into a new life. Today, I wake up in my small apartment in San Diego with the sound of waves drifting through my open window. The ocean has become my companion, reminding me every day that nothing remains still forever, not grief, not fear, not even heartbreak. My life now is simple, but it is no longer empty. I walk along the beach every morning. I volunteer at the library twice a week. I attend community meetings and share quiet meals with friends I never expected to have at this stage of my life. I laugh more easily. I sleep more peacefully. I am not healed completely, but I am whole enough to keep moving forward. Sometimes I still think about that bus. I remember the way my hand shook as I stood in the aisle. I remember Melissa's face, twisted with fear and desperation. I remember the sound of the doors closing behind me. That moment divided my life into two parts, everything before and everything after. For a long time, I avoided opening the letters my daughter sent from prison. They sat in my drawer like small, silent accusations. I was afraid of what they might awaken in me. But one quiet afternoon, with sunlight spilling across my kitchen table, I finally gathered the courage to read them. Her words were messy and imperfect. She wrote about regret, about therapy sessions, about classes she had started taking. She admitted her mistakes without blaming anyone else. She apologized again and again, not asking for forgiveness, only for the chance to become a better person. I cried as I read. Forgiveness did not come instantly. It arrived slowly, in fragments, over months. I learned that forgiving does not mean forgetting. It does not mean excusing. It means choosing not to let bitterness control the rest of your life. I'm still learning. Harold and I keep in touch. We speak every few months. He never takes credit for what he did, but I know I owe him everything. His courage reminded me that sometimes strangers protect us better than those closest to us. Writing has become my refuge. I began recording my memories in a notebook, then on a computer. Page by page, I turned pain into words. I told the story not to relive it, but to release it. If my experience helps even one person trust their instincts, then it serves a purpose. Looking back, I understand now that love without boundaries can become dangerous, that fear can silence wisdom, that desperation can distort reality. I also learned that it is never too late to start again. At 73, I am building a life that belongs to me, a life shaped by resilience, honesty, and self-respect. As the sun sets over the Pacific each evening, painting the sky in gold and purple, I stand on my balcony and breathe deeply. I survived, and now I choose to live. Life rarely ends where we expect it to. Sometimes it breaks us first, strips away what feels familiar, and forces us to rebuild from nothing but courage and truth. Yet within that breaking, there is also quiet strength. There is growth. There is the realization that survival is not just about staying alive, but about choosing to live with purpose, boundaries, and self-respect. Pain does not disappear, but it can become wisdom. Loss does not vanish, but it can teach us compassion. And fear, when faced honestly, can turn into clarity. Every ending carries the seed of a beginning. Every wound holds the possibility of healing. And every difficult chapter reminds us that it's never too late to start again. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more stories like this. Your support truly means everything.